Hey guys, tonight we're plunging into the muddy fields and aching backs of medieval peasantry, where farms weren't run with tractors or fancy tools, but with calloused hands, dirt, and grit. Forget the sunny cottages and bountiful harvests of storybooks. The real existence was brutal, uncertain, and ruled by seasons and lords who cared little for your sweat or sorrow. So tonight, we're asking what it really took to survive a single day as a medieval peasant, where your plowshare crashes through frozen earth, your loaf of stale bread barely fills your belly, and every dawn brought more toil, or worse. Every age had its own trials, so let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's always amazing to see how far these fields stretch. Now, dim the lights, pull your blanket close, and let's march into the fields of history together. You wake before dawn in a hut that smells of damp straw and last night's embers. The roof leaks in places so every drip lands on your shoulder like the slow beat of a drum. You lie on a thin pallet stuffed with straw that pokes your ribs until you shift and feel the cold seep through your tunic. Your breath hangs in the air as white puffs that disappear as quickly as they form. You taste grit in your mouth from yesterday's work and yesterday's porridge. Your eyes open to the faint glow of pre-sunrise sky slipping through the cracks in the walls. You blink away sleep and feel the ache in every joint. Your back protests as you sit up. The plank floor groans beneath you, and a rat scurries by your ankle. You try not to flinch. Rats are part of the furniture here. You stretch arms stiff with cramp and feel the muscles sing with protest. Each motion reminds you that today brings more labor. Same as before. You pull your small cloak closer around your shoulders and sit for a moment on the edge of your bed. The air prickles with cold that feels as sharp as broken glass. You press your palms together over your chest to coax warmth back into fingers that tingle. You swallow hard against the lump in your throat that is part hunger and part fear. One wrong move at the plow or hoe and you will hear punishment from the Lord's overseer. The hut is silent except for the drip of water through the roof and the creak of timber settling. You sniff the air and catch the faint tang of smoke from the central hearth where embers still glow under a layer of ash. You drag yourself forward and crouch before the hearth, cupping your hands to shelter the tiny flames. You poke at the coals with a stick and coax a flicker of fire. Smoke curls around you as you stir the embers until they flare to life. You press a handful of kindling to the hot spots, and soon a small blaze crackles under the iron cauldron. You toss in a pinch of damp wood and watch grey smoke swirl before the flames catch. The hut warms a little, but not enough to chase away the chill in your bones. You rub your arms and watch your breath condense in the rising heat. You close your eyes and imagine sunlight on your face instead of soot and cold. When the fire feels strong enough, you fetch a chipped bowl from beside the bed. The clay is cracked and stained, but it fits your hand as if it were part of you. You dip the bowl into the cauldron and lift a thin broth of porridge and water. It is lukewarm at best, but you gulp it down anyway. The grains stick in your throat and the taste is bitter with ash and grit, yet you swallow each bite as if it were gold. Your stomach grumbles, and you cradle your belly to keep it from snarling too loud. You take a moment to listen for any sound beyond your hut. Too early for the cockerel, and too late for the wolves. Only the wind sighs through holes in the walls. You wipe the edge of the bowl on your tunic and set it aside. You will use the cauldron again before the day is done, but never for anything better than this thin gruel. You stand and pull on rough breeches that itch against your legs. You tug a faded tunic over your head and tie a leather belt around your waist. The fabric is stiff from sweat from last week's toil, and it hangs heavy with moisture from the damp hut. You slip your feet into wooden clogs that pinch at your toes but protect against mud and muck. You knot a leather strap around your clogs to keep them from flying off when you stumble. You pause at the low window made of stretched animal hide. Through its cloudy surface you see the sky lighten to a pale grey. The distant tree line shimmers with frost, and the field beyond the hut looks like a silent sea of white. You imagine the ground beneath the frost, cold mud that will crack your hands if you do not thaw with work soon. You press your forehead to the window and draw a breath that fills your lungs and numbs your thoughts with morning air. Beyond the hut, you hear the faint sound of pickaxes striking earth and the soft rumble of oxen harnessed to a wooden plow. You sigh and step outside onto the sludge that surrounds your home. The mud sucks at your clogs, and you have to pull each foot free with a tug. You look back at the hut's crooked walls and promise yourself you will return to it tonight, if you can. You set your jaw and trudge toward the fields that already bristle with frost and promise more cold. As you walk, you pass neighbors emerging from their own huts. Groggy faces blotched with cold greet you with nods or muffled grunts. No time for pleasantries here. You trade a quick wave and keep moving. Each of you carries a bundle of tools or a tied roll of cloth. Weighed down with farm implements and personal belongings, you move as shadows in the dawn light, ghosts summoned by drudgery. You reach the edge of the field where wooden pallets hold rusted plow blades and spare rope. You set your bundle down and wipe mud from your hands on your tunic. You pat your pockets to check for flint and tinder, salt pork, and dry biscuits. You find enough to last until midday, maybe until you luck into some extra meal from the manor kitchen if you dare to ask. You tuck the supplies into your belt and hand your cloak to a companion to hang from a peg on the pallet stand. You pick up a thick rope bound to the plow beam and heave it over your shoulder. The wood is cold and rough, but solid in your grip. You step into the furrow and brace your feet against the frozen ground. Your partner guides the oxen into position, and you nod to signal your readiness. You feel the first pull against your shoulders as the oxen strain forward and tear the earth open. The smell of damp clay and fresh upheaval rises in your nostrils, and you swallow the hard taste of work. You lean into the yoke and plant your feet. The plow jolts with each lurch of the oxen, and the blade snaps through frost like a blade through cheese. Your arms shake and your back protests, but you hold fast. Each stroke of the beam releases tiny clouds of icy dust into the air. You hear the plow shearing through the earth, and you know this is only the beginning. Before the sun breaks free of the horizon, you have turned the first strip of field. It stretches longer than your hut is tall, and will take hours to finish. Your arms pulse with effort, and your breath comes in ragged bursts. Yet even as you choke on cold air, you feel the thrill of survival. You are alive in the mud and sweat and frostbite of medieval life. You swallow another gulp of water from your flask and grit your teeth for the hours ahead. The frost will give way to soggy soil, and your clogs will fill with mud. Your hands will blister and your shoulders will ache. You will hear the Lord's overseer shout for more speed and curse your lack of strength. But you will endure, because this is your world. And for a single sunrise, you are part of the endless circle of dirt and toil that built these fields one strip at a time. You wipe the sweat from your brow as the oxen strain to pull the plow through the thawing earth. Your arms tremble, but you cannot rest yet. You drop the plow beam into the furrow and stumble backward. Your feet sink ankle deep in mud that stares back at you with every step. You bend at the waist, palms pressed into the cool soil, and lift a deep breath of damp air. You taste iron and clay on your tongue. You hear the low whinny of the mare in the barn and remind yourself that the animals must eat before you can claim a single bite of breakfast. You untie the rope from the plow and step off the field, leaving neat ridges of turned earth behind you. You trudge toward the barn, the mud sucking at your clogs with every stride. The sky overhead bleeds pale pink as dawn finally breaks free of the horizon. Inside the barn, it is warmer but still dim. A thin sheen of frost clings to wooden beams and to the mare's flank. You kneel beside her manger and scoop handfuls of coarse oats into her feed trough. She nudges your shoulder with her muzzle, impatient for more. You scratch behind her ear and feel the soft sweep of her coat under your fingertips. This small kindness makes the cold dull at your bones for a moment. You lift the bucket you carried from home and empty a measure of stale barley into the pig's pen, where a rusty trough waits. The pigs grunt and scramble for position, but one spots your hand and nudges you for a treat. You rub its bristly head and pat its flank before stepping back. Your knees ache from the squat. You straighten and stiffly shake out your breeches to shed caked mud. Next comes the chickens. You scoop your hands into a burlap sack of grain and scatter kernels across the yard. Clucks and frantic flapping follow as birds peck and scramble. One plump hen sidles close enough for you to stroke its back. You cradle it under an arm and feel its beating heart against your side. You tuck the bird under the arm you most need free and half-carry, half-walk to the coop. You slip the hen into a nest box and crane your neck to peer under straw. 3 eggs glimmer pale beneath the bales. You gather them carefully in your hand, careful not to crack the fragile shells. Each egg is a treasure you will nuzzle into the morning porridge at dinner. Meal. You push open the hut door and feel the blast of cold air that chased the embers of your fire away. You poke at coals and stir them back to life. Sparks dance in your palms as you blow until a small flame leaps. You fetch a lumpy piece of salted fish from storage and fling it into the cauldron. The broth hisses and spits as fat bubbles to the surface. You add a handful of the eggs you collected, and with the barn chores done, you hang the empty sack on a peg and head back to the hearth for a second. Watch them poach in the rising heat. While the stew simmers, you step outside to gather firewood. A pile of thin branches lies near the edge of the woodlot. You heft a handful at a time to your shoulder and trudge back to the hut. Each load leaves splinters in your tunic and drips sap on your neck. You dare not complain. Without fire, you would shiver through the day. You stack the wood against the wall and wipe your hands on your breeches. By the time you return, the stew is ready. You ladle a generous portion into your chipped bowl and breathe in the hot steam. The smell of fish and eggs mingles with wood smoke in your nostrils. You take a careful sip and let the warmth slide down your throat. The taste is salty and rich enough to banish hunger for another few hours. You swallow another spoonful and savor the fleeting comfort before the next chore calls. You rise with renewed energy and sling your bowl back on its hook. Your clogs scrape the dirt floor as you cross to the well. You wrap both hands around the rough bucket rope and lower it into cold depths. The bucket drops with a wet thud and ripples of dark water shine beneath the surface. You heave it up, each curl of rope sending shock through your shoulders. At last, the bucket clears the opening and you spill water into a leather jug for the day's work. You sling the jug across your back and step onto the threshold. The air greets you with fresh winds that taste of upcoming rain. You pass your neighbors who carry bundles of firewood or lead goats to pasture. Their faces are drawn but resolute. You exchange a quick nod. No words are needed. Each of you carries your burden in silence. Back at the field edge, you collect the plow beam again. You snap a glance at the long furrow you cut before the barn chores. Sunlight glints on the turned earth. The lines you carved in the first furrow promise a harvest in months if the weather holds and the Lord spares his levy. You lean into the beam and dig the blade back into the mud. Oxen reattach with soft grunts, and forward you move, carving more earth into ridges. Your arms tremble under the strain. You taste metal on your tongue from grit in the stew. You feel sun on your face as the last of the clouds break overhead. Sweat and mud slide in rivulets down your temples. You wipe them away on your sleeve and force yourself to lean deeper into the beam. You feel the silent encouragement of ancestors who turned this land before you. As midday nears, you hear the distant horn from the manor announcing dinner. You glance at the sky and measure the angle of the sun. 2 more furrows, and you can rest. You grit your teeth and push on. Each fresh ridge you carve is a testament to your will. Each handful of earth you lift echoes the labor of every peasant who ever lived. By the time the horn sounds again, you have heaved 3 straining furrows. Your arms ache and your back creaks like old timber, but you step off the beam with a fierce pride. You delivered more land to the estate, and you earned your meal. You slip the rope from the oxen's yoke and guide them back to the barn for midday feed. They nuzzle your hands in thanks, and you smile despite the exhaustion that ripples in your bones. You return home carrying a bundle of green fodder for the animals at your shoulder. The hut door opens with a groan. Inside the hearth still glows with dying embers. You poke at the coals and stir until a gentle flame returns. You drop the fodder in the corner for the goats you will herd later. You fetch your bowl and bite into the bread soaked in leftover broth. The bread has softened, and the taste is richer now that you smell sweat and soil. You pause at the window, hide and peer outside. The fields stretch vast beneath the high sun. You run a hand through tangled hair and think how each furrow you carved is part of a single unbroken chain of labor that binds you to the land. Today you woke before dawn and built strength with the sweat of your brow. Tomorrow you will do the same. You settle by the hearth as your stomach quiets and your hands rest. A moment of calm before the next round of toil. You listen to the crackle of the fire and taste pride in the warm bread. In these simple acts of feeding hearth and field, you find purpose. And you know that for one precious sunrise you stood a medieval peasant in all your glory and misery. You grip the heavy beam of the wooden plough and feel its weight settle across your palm. The wood is rough from 1,000 years of making furrows in this soil. Your fingers flex against the coarse grain, and you taste grit in your mouth just from the handle's embrace. You straighten your shoulders and press your boots into the churned mud at your feet. The oxen snort beside you as they shift their weight, ready to pull you forward into the waiting earth. You scoop a handful of straw from the ground and wedge it into the ox yoke to cushion raw hides against the beam. The sweat on your brow cools as the wind carries the first heat of the morning sun across the field. You step back and nod to the teamster who sits astride the lead ox, his rough voice rumbling out orders that you cannot always hear. You lean into the plough beam until the blade catches in the frozen crust beneath the frost line. The plough jolts like a living creature as it tears into the ground. You bend at the waist and press every ounce of your weight onto the shaft. Each step is a struggle as the furrow opens behind you. Hard clay pops out in clods that land heavy in the trench. You twist to look ahead and see the soil fracturing in a neat line that stretches farther than your eye can trace. The world narrows to the plough beam and the oxen's slow trudge. Your back aches with every forward lunge. You imagine your spine creaking like the old wood of the plough's frame. Sweat gathers in the small of your back, where leather straps dig into your tunic. You release a breath you did not know you held and taste iron on your tongue as your chest rises and falls. You glance down at your hands and see fresh cuts and blistered rings of hardened flesh forming, where rope and wood have rubbed raw against your skin. The oxen grunt and strain to pull the weight of the plough. You urge them on with a soft hiss through your teeth. Their muscles ripple beneath their hides as they move in tandem with your steps. Mud splashes the sides of their legs and your boots. You keep pace with their slow rhythm, matching your pull with their forward thrust. Together you carve the earth as if it were clay on a potter's wheel, shaping the field into neat rows that promise a spring harvest. At noon the sun stands high enough to burn through your cloak. You pause at the end of the furrow and plant your hands on your hips to catch your breath. You look back at the 3 long strips you have turned since dawn. Each looks tidy in the patchwork of fields, but you know the effort each one demanded. You lift the plough blade out of the ground and rest the beam on your shoulder. The wood presses into your flesh and leaves a bruise where you lean. You wipe a trickle of sweat from your brow and feel the sting of salt on raw skin. You wipe at your hands in the mud and grit sticks in the grooves of your palm. You press a cloth from your belt against the worst of the cuts and knot it tight enough to keep the dirt out. Your fingers tremble, but you stand tall. There is no shame in sore hands or aching back. This is the work that feeds your kin and binds you to the land. You refill the oxen's feed bag with a handful of grain from your pouch. They lower their heads and chew gratefully as you whisper a word of thanks into the throat of the nearest beast. The simple kindness reminds you that you share this struggle with living creatures who work by your side. You rest a moment, leaning against the yoke, and feel the heat of the sun warm the iron ring where the plow meets the yoke. The earth here is heavier than you expected this season. Winter rains have packed the clay into a stubborn crust that resists every stroke of the beam. You press your feet into the mud as you begin the next furrow. The blade snaps under your push, and you lurch forward against the oak handle. Your breath hitches, and your shoulders burn with the strain. Even so, you push on, convinced that the sweat and toil you pour into the land will yield more than simple stones and roots. By afternoon, the field looks like a patchwork of trenches and sun-darkened ridges. Your knees quiver beneath you, but you press your palm into the soil and hook your fingers into the soft earth. You rise and lift the plow once more, leaning into the motion until the oxen answer your silent command. The beam sinks in, and you guide it straight, trusting your calloused hands to hold true. Rain clouds gather to the west, and you sense the storm's promise in every draft of wind. You wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders and push through the discomfort of soaked fabric. Your boots squelch as you advance and retreat, marking the progress of another strip. Each pass of the plow blade loosens the earth and readies it for seed and hope. You feel a glimmer of triumph in the promise of green to come. Your arms shake after hours of grip and pull, but you refuse to quit. You take a quick gulp of water from your flask and press your lips to the cold metal. The liquid spills across your tongue and slides down your throat with a welcome burn. You press the flask back into your belt and lift your chin to the sky. A thin line of rain sweeps across the field. You wipe your mouth and lift the plow once more. Your hands, now textured with calluses shaped by every curve of the plow beam, grip the handle as if it were an old friend. Each knuckle bears scars of grit and mud. You flex your fingers and feel strength in every joint. You recall the ache from yesterday and the day before that. You realize this pain is less a burden than proof of your place here. With each furrow you lay claim to this land and earn your keep. The sky darkens and thunder rumbles as you finish the last furrow before the barn bell rings. The oxen slow of their own accord, and you step back to let them rest. Mud slides in great globs from your boots as you climb down from the yoke. Your legs tremble under the fatigue, but you stand firm. You pat the nearest ox on the flank and catch its eye. You whisper a word of praise and guide it alongside its mate. You look back at the field and feel a surge of pride in the neat trenches you carved. Each row will feed your family and your neighbors if the harvest holds. You wipe your brow one final time and feel the sting of sweat and rain in your hair. You lift the plow beam across your shoulder and walk toward the barn where a warm hearth and dry clothes await. You step into the yard between furrows and twist your stiff back. You feel the heat of labor in your bones and the calluses in your hands. You smile through exhaustion and know that when dawn comes again, you will return to this field. But for now you let the ache sink in and savor the fierce pride that comes from hard plow and calloused hands. You lift the plow beam again and settle your feet in the soft furrow you carved before the sun climbed high. The wood feels heavy in your hands, as if it carries the weight of every furrow you have carved today. Your arms tremble slightly when you brace the yoke against your shoulder, but you grit your teeth and lean into the motion. The oxen snort and shuffle forward as you guide the blade deeper into the earth. Each step is timed to their slow pull until the plow blade snaps through soft soil that cracks open in rough plates. You rise a little with each forward heave and let out a breath of effort that tastes of sweat and soil. Mid-morning brings a sudden crack as the plowshare strikes a hidden root. You stumble and feel the metal edge wobble against the wood frame. The oxen hesitate beneath the sudden jolt. You press a hand to the beam and mutter a prayer under your breath. Crouching in the furrow, you pull a small hammer and wrench from your belt. Mud clings to your knees and your tunic rides up wet and heavy across your back. You hammer at the iron bracket until the metal shifts back into place. Sweat drips into your eyes, but you scrape it away with the back of your hand. The repair holds and the oxen resume their steady pull. You rise and toss the tools back into your pouch. Your neighbor lurches past on the other side of the same strip. You call out to him and he pauses to share a quick trick he learned for keeping the yoke steady when the sun bakes the soil dry. He blinks in the glare and offers you a handful of flax seeds as thanks for yesterday's meal. You take them and tuck them into your pocket. You return the gesture by pointing out a low spot in the field where water pools into a muddy trap that can swallow a plow blade. He nods and limps on as you wipe your brow and watch his figure shrink toward the barn. The brief camaraderie steels your will for the next stretch of labor. By midday, your hands are maps of calluses and fresh tears. You pause at the field's edge and pull a length of coarse cloth from your belt. You wrap the cloth around your palm and knead the swollen skin until the pain dulls to a steady ache. You probe the thick calluses with a finger and feel hidden tears that throb with every heartbeat. You remember that the healer in the village uses plant oils and vinegar to soothe such wounds. You vow to visit her when your chores allow. For now, you tie the cloth snug and press your hand into the plow beam until it stops buzzing. Clouds scuttle across the sky, and you sense rain on the wind. You lean over and scoop handfuls of the turned earth to test its dampness. The soil clings heavy and dark between your fingers. You pat down the top ridge and watch how it holds its shape. In a moment, the first droplets fall like a cold warning. You wipe mud from your face and pull your cloak tighter across your shoulders. The rain hammers the field in thin spines, and you pause your work to let the worst pass. You stand still in the whispering downpour and feel each drop run down your neck. When the rain eases, you return to the field with renewed grit. You loop a coil of rope around the oxen's yoke to shore up the timber supports that have loosened under strain. Your fingers twist the rough fibers until the knot looks firm enough to hold. You step into the furrow and press the plowshare deep into the softened soil. The world narrows to the rhythm of earth cracking and your boots splashing in the muddied trench. Each pass brings fresh clouds of clay dust, even in the damp air. You welcome it as proof that you are alive and in control of every furrow. As the sun begins its slow sweep toward sunset, your arms burn with exhaustion, but you refuse to yield. You coax the oxen through one final stretch of field. Each forward tug of the plow and each step of the beasts beneath you carries you closer to the barn. At last you haul the plow beam from the earth and rest the wood on your shoulder with a grunt. You step out of the furrow and feel the world shift beneath your muddy feet. You pat the plowshare as if it were a comrade and whisper thanks that it held true. You guide the oxen back along the path you cut this morning. Behind you, the field gleams with dark trenches, nestled between ridges that form neat lines in the fading light. You feel pride surge through your tired limbs. You carried wood, metal, and rope on your back. You carved earth with only brute strength and rough tools. You bent calloused hands and scorched raw skin against the day's labor. And yet you stand here alive with the fierce pride of knowing you tilled this land with your own two hands. You step into the barnyard and breathe deep of hay and sweat and promise yourself that tomorrow at dawn you will return to the field once more. You step out into the field before dawn's first light, the air thick with mist and the scent of wet earth. The furrows you carved yesterday lie between clumps of stubborn weeds that have already begun to reclaim the soil. You clutch a simple wooden hoe in one hand and a wicker basket in the other, its handle rough against blistered palms. Each plot you tend is no larger than a small room, yet the row upon row of seedlings demands endless attention. One stray burdock hooked on a tender shoot can smother an entire clutch of wheat if you let it grow. With a practiced swing, you drive the hoe's blade beneath a patch of knotweed. The metal slips under tangled roots with a sickening pop, and you lean your weight into the handle until the weed lifts free. Clods of mud stick to the fresh root as you drag it free and let it thud into the basket. Your back arches with the motion, and you feel a jab of pain between your shoulders, a reminder that these strips of earth never rest, and neither can you. Rain begins to fall in thin sheets, turning the ground into a quagmire. Your boots sink ankle-deep with every step, and mud oozes between your toes. Instead of the hoe, you switch to pulling by hand, root by root, so as not to damage the seedlings you've barely managed to coax into life. You grip the base of a daisy-like weed and tug until the root and its surrounding soil pop free. The cold rain soaks through your tunic, but you barely notice. There is no shelter here, except hard work. The basket at your side fills fast, with green and brown refuse. You pause to knock off the heaviest clumps of clay from a handful of twitchgrass before dropping it in. The weight of the day becomes literal as the basket grows heavier, but you cannot stop. A single moment's rest risks letting weeds seed and spread, leaving you to fight them again tomorrow. And the next day after that, you grit your teeth and lean back into the motion. Between each weed, you inspect the young shoots of barley, fingers brushing dew from their leaves. The rows are tight and neat, no wider than a finger's breadth between stems. One careless dig could uproot a tender sprout and halve your yield come harvest. You repay the soil's mercy with reverence, planting each seed in straight lines and keeping the spacing exact. Yet, however precise your care, the weeds grow faster than you can pull. Your neighbor appears at the next strip, hoe in hand, and face drawn from weather and worry. He calls a greeting, and you wave through mud-streaked rain. He tips his hat and offers you a handful of wild fennel seeds to sprinkle in the paths between rows, claiming they deter certain pests. You accept and nod, but you know tomorrow you'll still bend to weed. There is no magic in this work, only arms bent to the ground, and a heart that refuses to quit. The sun breaks through low clouds by midday, burning off the rain but bringing blistering heat. You shelter under a small tree at the field's edge and bite into a crust of bread you saved for lunch. The crust is chewy from damp, but your stomach grumbles in gratitude. You pour cool water from your skin-softened flask into your mouth, tasting straw and sweat. Even as you rest, you keep an eye on your basket, ready to strain another patch of field in a moment's notice. Back in the rows, the ground has begun to dry and crack. Dried mud cakes the hose blade and forces you to stop every few strokes to clear it. You lean over and scrape the blade on a flat stone, the metal spark bright under the sun. Sweat runs down your back, soaking the cloth and chilling you as the breeze stirs. You shrug free of your tunic's damp weight and tie it around your waist, skin prickled by sweat and grit. In the afternoon light, you tackle a section overrun with thistles. Their barbed leaves snag your sleeves and sting your skin if you brush too hard. You switch to a small hand knife to cut around each spiky base, twisting the root free with care. Each plant fights you with its own defenses. Thorns that catch and rip, sap that stains your gloves. You work methodically, knowing that any missed root will sprout again before the moon rises. By late afternoon, your basket overflows. You pause at the field's edge and lift it onto your shoulder, grimacing at the weight. You march toward the compost pile at the barnyard, each step a reminder of the miles your hands have walked in bent posture. You empty the basket onto the growing heap of weeds and clay, the refuse of your day's battle against nature's tenacity. You stand upright for the first time in hours, stretching your shoulders until they crack in relief. You let the breeze dry your sweat and mud as you survey the tidy strips behind you. Each cleared row is a small victory, a narrow ribbon of hope between choking green. You pat your back and whisper a vow to return at dawn to keep these strips weed-free. For a medieval peasant, this unending war against mud and weed is the real siege. And every time you pull free another root, you stand a little taller in the knowledge that you have wrested life from dust and toil. You gather your tools again at the field's edge as the sun dips low. The day's labor is far from done. You pick up the hoe and brush fresh mud from the blade with the back of your hand. The metal is gritty beneath your palm, a constant reminder that this work never stops. You step into the first row you cleared this morning and notice fresh sprouts of nettles crowding the soil. They shoot up faster than barley, their serrated leaves itching for sun and space. You grip your hoe and lean in. With each swing you scrape away layers of topsoil to expose the roots beneath. Mud flies in bitter clumps that slap against your boots and thighs. You wade through the trench you carved earlier, intent on keeping weeds from stealing water and nutrients. You pull at roots that wind deep into the earth, twisting your wrist until you taste dust in your mouth. Each root pulls free, with a snap that echoes in your arms and back. You stand upright for a moment and wipe sweat from your forehead. The field glows gold in the evening light. You can see the neat lines you've carved running side by side like tidy lanes. Tomorrow's sunrise will bring new tasks, watering, more weeding, perhaps turning the soil again. But tonight, the sight of a weed-free ridge brings a spark of pride you tuck into your chest. You move on to the next strip, where creeping vines of bindweed cling to the young grain stalks. Their pale flowers whisper in the breeze, a siren song for careless hands. You kneel on one knee and grasp the vine at its base. You tug gently until a root ball snaps free in your grip. You toss the vine into the basket at your side, careful not to let it brush against your pant leg. You know that a single tendril left behind will sprout again by morning. A soft sound makes you look up. The manor's bell tolls for evening prayers. Its tone drifts across the fields with a steady rhythm that marks time in this place. You pause and rest a hand against the back of a young barley shoot, feeling its green stem tremble under your touch. You whisper a prayer for rain and sun in just the right measure, for a harvest that will feed your family and spare you from famine. Your gaze drifts to the woodland edge where shadows lengthen. You imagine the wolves that prowl there at night, waiting for opportunities to slip into weak flocks or unguarded gardens. You clear a patch of chickweed with swift strokes, reminding yourself of the thin line between order and chaos. The field must be held every moment if you hope to claim its yield. The cool air settles beneath the trees, and you shrug your cloak over your shoulders. You kneel again and cup your fingers around a cluster of tiny mustard sprouts. They color the soil with hope, tiny green flames flickering in the dusk. You gently thin them so each plant can root deep and grow strong. You brush away stray weeds that threaten to choke the slender stalks. Your hands move with practiced precision, each motion honed by seasons of care. A neighbor's lantern glows in the distance as he begins his walks through his own strips. You hear his footsteps soft against the grass path and the clink of tools on his belt. You lift your head and give him a nod, the slightest lift of your chin. He returns the gesture and carries on. You feel the silent camaraderie in the shared toil. Night air grows colder, and you shiver beneath your cloak. You press your palms against your cheeks to chase away the chill. You work faster now, racing daylight to finish the last beds before darkness swallows the fields. You rake the blade of your hoe along the shallow trench one final time, cutting any tiny shoots of chickweed that escaped earlier pruning. Your basket is nearly full of weeds again, and you know this pile will only sprout more next season if you do not burn it. You cast your load onto the compost heap beside the barn, the green refuse rotting into future fertilizer. The fragrant steam rises from the heap in the night air. You press your hands to your knees and breathe deep. The scent is sour but comforting, the smell of life recycled through sweat and mud. You step back into the field and survey your work. The rows you tend run like silver lines beneath the moonlight. You kneel by a single barley shoot and trace its blade to the soil. You brush mud and clods away and feel the cool ground cling to your palm. A single drop of dew glitters on the leaf tip. You lift it to your lips and let it vanish on your tongue. Water tastes sweeter than ale, even in the thinnest measure. Your bones ache from kneeling so long. You stretch your hamstrings and stand slowly, each joint protesting the shift. You dust straw from your knees and wipe your hands on your tunic. You slip your small knife from its sheath and trim ragged edges from a broken blade of grass that scratched your calf. Even these small scrapes can fester without care. You press a dab of vinegar wrapped in cloth to the cut and tie it in place with a strip of linen. A chill wind stirs, and you pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. You step into the soft mud one last time and follow the edge of the field back to the barnyard. Your boots squelch and leave muddy footprints in the path behind you. You pause at the threshold of the barn and look back at the furrows and beds you tended. You feel a quiet victory in knowing tomorrow you will return and face the weeds anew. Inside the barn, the lantern flickers beneath hay bales and leather harnesses. You hang your tools on a peg and wipe your blade with a scrap of cloth. Each motion is a ritual of care. Clean tools last longer, break less, and save you effort when you need them most. You wipe your boots on the threshold mat and step onto straw, grateful for dry ground beneath your feet. You head to the barn wall, where a roasted glow hints at the hearth beyond. You find a tin cup and fill it with warm broth ladled from the cook's pot. The steam warms your face as you carry the cup to a bench. You sit and cradle the cup, letting the heat seep into your palms. You sip the liquid slowly, tasting carrot and turnip softened by hours of simmering. You close your eyes and listen to the gentle clucks of hens settling in the coop and the low creak of the barn door as the wind moves it. You taste salt and life mingled in the stew. You remember every weed you pulled, every seedling you spared, every hour you bent to the soil. Each moment of toil now tastes like triumph in the simple bowl. As the last drop of broth warms your belly, you rise and set the cup aside. You feel the cold air brush your back beneath the open doorway. You step onto the threshold and feel the night wind whirl around you. You breathe deep and taste earth and sleep mingled in the air. You walk the short path back to your hut, boots wet with muddy tracks. You hear the distant hoot of an owl and the rush of unseen water in a nearby stream. You step inside the dim hut and pull your cloak free of mud. You hang it on a peg beside the door. You settle onto your straw pallet and pull a second blanket over you. You close your eyes and feel every ache in your back and shoulders. You remember the field and the weeds and the brittle joy of pulling each root free. You whisper, thanks for your hands and the calluses that mark your survival. As sleep claims you, you dream of furrows glimmering in dawn, light, and rows of barley stretching toward the sky. You dream of fields without a single weed in sight. Tomorrow, you will wake again before dawn and return to the muddy trenches. And in that relentless cycle of work and rest, you find the fierce pride of a medieval peasant whose hands know the strength of land. You step into the low doorway of the hut and feel the soft warmth of the hearth wrap around you like a worn blanket. The rough stone fireplace fills one wall and is blackened by years of soot and smoke. An iron pot hangs from a hook above the glowing embers, and its contents simmer in a thin broth you know well. It holds water, a few root vegetables, and the last scraps of salted meat. The air inside is thick with steam and the sharp scent of vinegar that you have come to crave even when your stomach roars with emptiness. Your boots make soft thuds on the straw floor as you move closer to the fire. One hand brushes soot from the pot's handle and the other rests on the rough-hewn table beside you. 2 loaves of bread sit there waiting. They were baked once this week in exchange for a share of your barley. The crust is as hard as any stone you have turned in the fields, and the inside is dense with bran and grit. You lift one loaf and turn it in your hands. You could eat it in one sitting if you dared, but this half loaf must last until the next dawn. You slice off a thick chunk with your short knife. The blade scrapes across the crust and sends crumbs scattering over the table and onto the straw below. You brush the crumbs away with your sleeve, because not a single grain should go to waste. You tear the piece in half and press one half into the simmering broth. The bread soaks up liquid until it softens and swells. You lift the spooned stew and softened loaf to your lips. It is lukewarm and thin, but you savor the welcome heat. The vegetables are tender, and the meat is barely more than tendon, but it is enough to chase away the chill that has settled in your bones. Your child sits by the fire's edge on a scrap of cloth and rocks a tin cup between small. Hands. You break off the second half of the loaf and hand it over without a word. The child bites into the softened bread slowly, as if each chew is a blessing. You watch for crumbs on the chin and wipe them away gently. The sight eases the hollow ache in your own belly. Your partner sits across the fire, eyes shaded by the dancing flames. Wrinkled hands rest in the lap, and a faint smile appears when the child giggles at a stray onion floating in the broth. You ladle another portion into each bowl and set them on the table. You lift the small ladle to your own mouth and taste broth that sings of carrot and turnip. You swallow in measured bites, each spoonful a fleeting comfort. Hunger tugs at your senses, but you hold it at bay for as long as you can. A neighbor slips in through the doorway holding a woven basket. The mud from the field still clings to their boots, and the cloak drips with rain. Inside the basket are 2 bright apples from the merchant who passed through earlier. The neighbor sets them on the table and bows their head. You reach out and cradle the fruit with rough hands. You place 1 apple within reach of your child and watch as eyes light with delight. You slice it into slices with the knife, then offer the first sweet piece. The taste is crisp and sharp, and you close your eyes to savor it. Outside the hut, the wind rattles the eaves and the rain taps on the roof. The light in the hut softens as embers glow in the hearth. You finish your broth and set down the wooden bowl, scraping every last drop with a finger. You drop the remains of the crust to the barn cats. They emerge from the shadows, tails high, and snap at the bread with happy squeaks. Even moldy bread feeds them, and you feel better knowing nothing goes to waste. You carry your child to the straw pallet in the corner. You tuck them under a thin blanket and smooth hair from their forehead. Their eyelids droop as the warmth of the hut and the comfort of the stew bring them close to sleep. You cast a glance at your partner and share a nod that says together you will endure another night. You rise and pour water into a wooden basin. You wipe soot from the bowls and set them to dry by the hearth. You refill the pot with cold stream water so it will be ready for morning porridge. Then you lean against the hearthstone for a moment, warming chilled shoulders. You taste the last sweetness of apple on your lips and breathe in the smoky air. You lie down on your own pallet and pull the blanket close. Hunger will return before dawn, but for now the warmth of the hearth and the memory of bread and broth lull you toward sleep. Outside the wind still moans, but inside the hut you have tasted enough comfort to last until first light. You rise before dawn to tend the hearth once more. The coals lie buried beneath ash, like embers waiting to be reborn. You clear away the grey dust with a poker and coax a flicker of flame from the stubborn embers. The tunnel of smoke rises straight for the rafters as you lift a handful of kindling and hold it to the glow. Soon a small blaze crackles beneath the iron pot that will serve as your cauldron for the day's porridge. You measure out a cup of barley from the clay jar tucked beside the hearth. The grains rattle as you pour them into the pot. You add 3 cups of water drawn from the well and deliver a steady stream of bubbles that break the silent dawn. You stir with a wooden spoon carved from an old oak branch. The spoon is smooth in your grasp, even though its handle bears grooves made by your own hands. While the barley cooks, you heave open the hut door against the cold air. You step outside and carry a bundle of dry twigs to the hearth. The wood snaps beneath your burden and falls into a basket by the hearth. You toss in a few pieces and close the door to seal the warmth inside. You return to the pot and stir again, watching how the grains swell and soften in the heat. Your neighbor comes in behind you, carrying a small pouch of dried peas. They earned it in exchange for a handful of eggs. You nod in thanks and tip the peas into your cauldron. The mix of barley and peas simmers into a thick mash that smells of earth and promise. You stir until the porridge reaches the right consistency. It will not satisfy hunger, but it will ease the edge of emptiness gnawing at your belly. You fetch 2 cracked bowls from beside the table. Each bowl bears a chip that you glued with clay weeks ago. You ladle a portion into each bowl and watch the steam rise in twisting threads. You dip your spoon and taste. The porridge is bland, but it carries a faint sweetness from the peas. You swallow a bite and release a hum of approval. You share the second bowl with your spouse across the table. Outside the hut, the sky lightens to pale grey. You lift your mug and warm your hands on its rim. A single swallow of porridge soothes your throat, but hunger still presses at your sides. You break a small piece of crusty bread from yesterday's loaf. The crust cracks under your fingers and you dip it into the porridge. It softens quickly in the hot mash. You bring the soaked bread to your lips and chew with deliberate care. The door opens again as the child enters barefoot and yawning. Their hair hangs in damp strands around their face. You hand them the last piece of bread and watch them devour it with surprising grace. They savor each bite. You press your palm to their back to steady them as the porridge drips on their woolen tunic. You gather the crumbs and sweep them into your hand to be crumbled into the stew pot later. The oxen bray from the barn. You slide down from your bench and tie your tunic at the waist. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve and step into the yard to feed them. Each animal nuzzles the grain from your hand as if it were a delicacy. You offer thanks in a soft tone and scoop fresh water from a trough. You return to the hearth to fill your water skin for the day. Back inside, you spot the broken loaf you left in the corner. It has dried into a rock-hard slab. You pull out your knife and chip off a few shards to fry in the remaining porridge on the stove. The fragments crisp in the thin grease left from the salted meat you cooked earlier. You toss them into your bowl for a last bite. The crunch surprises your senses. In that small moment, you taste something close to luxury. You clean the bowls and spoon and hang them to dry beside the fire. You lift a small basket of wild herbs you foraged by the river yesterday. You crush mint and sorrel leaves between your fingers and toss a handful into your pouch. Later you will boil them into tea. Even a bitter brew warms the stomach and calms the mind. The morning chores call. You step outside again, feeling the sun's first weak rays on your face. You close your eyes and breathe deep, tasting barley, peas, bread, and sweat on the wind. Hunger may return within hours, but this small feast has fortified you for the field. Meanwhile, the pot that held your porridge cools on its hook. You lower it and scrape out every last bit of mush into a basket for the pigs. They will feast on starchy scraps and fill space in their bellies that they cannot feed themselves. You carry the basket to the pen and toss in the gruel. Grunts of satisfaction follow. Even the livestock must endure the meager rations of this life. You gather your tools for weeding and ploughing. Each swing and tug will burn calories you cannot replace until tonight. Your back quivers at the thought. Hunger will strike again by midday. Yet you know this day must be met head-on. You wipe your hands on your breeches and step onto the sun-baked earth. You glance back at the hut where the hearth-bearers rest. You promise them more porridge and maybe a scrap of bread tonight. By dusk you will return, knuckles blistered, shoulders aching, stomach hollow. You will coax the embers back to life, simmer barley and peas in that scratched iron pot, and soak stale bread in the thin stew. You will taste the same bland porridge and toasted crust, but tonight you will taste the comfort of survival, a warmth no feast of princes could match. Until then, you carry the memory of today's ration in every step you take, in every seed you plant, in every weed you pull free. Hunger is a shadow that follows every peasant. Yet around the hearth you reclaim a small victory over emptiness. You feed your family a meager meal and find strength in the simple acts of cooking, sharing, and persisting. And so you march back toward the fields, where weeds and furrows await. You hold the promise of the hearth and bread against the hunger that gnaws. You hold the knowledge that every grain you sow and every scrap you eat comes from sweat and sacrifice. That is the life of a peasant. That is the weight of survival beneath a sky that offers no promise beyond the next dawn. You awake before dawn to the summons of the manor bell echoing across the fields. It tumbles through the mist and rattles in your bones. You rise from your straw pallet and pull on boots stiff with mud from yesterday. Your heart sinks because you know this summons will not be for your own land, but for the Lord's demands. You step into the yard where fellow peasants gather, lanterns in hand and breath swirling in pale clouds. The bailiff stands by the old oak, ledger in hand, eyes cold as iron. He reads from the list of names and points each of you toward a task. Some are ordered to repair the Lord's road leading to the keep. Others must haul stone from the quarry to shore up the granary wall. You nod when your name is called, and collect a heavy wooden shovel and a leather water flask strapped to your belt. You march in silence along the muddy path to the manor's guardhouse. The earth shears under the feet of your oxen, ploughed fields left abandoned while you serve. With every step you feel the fields you own slipping further behind in unturned furrows and unpulled weeds. You feel guilt gnawing at your belly for every hour spent under the Lord's whip instead of planting your own seed. At the guardhouse, a line of carts waits, each loaded with stones for the manor's new stable. The bailiff assigns you to cart 7. You climb into the wooden trough and squat on the rough planks. The bailiff measures out your forced labor levy in days. You owe 6 days this season for the corvée and another 3 for building the manor's dovecote. All of it on top of tithes and taxes that swallow a quarter of your harvest. You grasp the cart's rail as the oxen pull, each hoof crushing unripe barley and soft clover in fields that will go untilled. You feel the bones of your hands creak as you hang on. Each jolt threatens to spill you onto the road, but you cling tight because dropping to the mud would cost you another day of labor. You taste dust in your mouth and feel it grind between your teeth. The manor's blacksmith throws a raven-haired look your way as you trudge past. You lower your head. You know the blacksmith will demand unpaid hours to forge new hinges for the gatehouse. You cannot refuse. The law leaves no journey for a poor man's protest. When the cart slows, you leap down and heft a granite block onto your shoulder. The stone is heavy enough to bruise your ribs and cut your fingers on every rough edge. You brace your feet against the cobbles and carry the stone to the stable wall. Sweat runs from your brow and drips into your eyes. You blink away the sting and set the block into the mortar. Your hands cradle the grit between stone and stone until the block sits snug. By midday, the sun piercing through grey clouds has turned your tunic into a soaked rag. The bailiff's shout echoes for a break. You lean against the stable wall and gulp water from your flask. The liquid tastes of leather and moss, but it fills your lungs with relief. A bale of straw sits nearby, and you perch on it to catch your breath while you watch the carts move stone and men struggle under each load. Your neighbor trudges by, dragging a wheelbarrow with iron fittings for the manor's bathing house. He tips his hat in greeting. You offer a nod. Neither of you speaks, because words fall short of the exhaustion that hammers at your spines. You swallow a crust of stale bread you tucked in your pouch. It tastes of bran and regret because it means less rations at home. The bailiff's horn blasts again and you rise. There is more to be done. The manor's new dovecot must be raised on precise stone courses. You join the ring of labourers at the base, stacking stones to shoulder height before masons affix them with lime mortar. You wedge stones into place until your shoulders burn and your wrists protest. Each block you lift delays the sowing of your own fields and spells another week of empty bellies at home. When the dovecote stands 3 courses high, the bailiff signals that your forced labour duty for the day is fulfilled. You step away from the mortar and wipe your hands on your breeches. You measure the fields in your mind and taste the bitterness of time lost. You owe another day next week, and 2 more before the grain harvest arrives. You limp back toward your village, shoulders aching, thumbs throbbing where the rope cut into your skin. You pass fields that lie fallow because no man remains to plough them. You feel the pull of drought on your soul as you imagine unplanted seed. You carry empty tools past rows of woodpile and barnyard, each step a reminder that the Lord's demand spares nothing for your own fields. At home you find the barn door hung with a yellow notice bearing the Lord's seal. The bailiff demands your last piglet in taxes because the flock grew too large last spring. You swallow hard and step inside the barn. Your wife stands there, eyes wide with fear. You place your hand on her shoulder even as your own heart pounds. She will deliver the piglet to the manor's cookhouse tomorrow at dawn. Inside the barn, you cradle the small sow against your chest. She squeals in panic. You stroke her flank and whisper a promise that you will make restitution in the next season. You can only hope the Lord Steward will show mercy. But mercy is a stranger in these parts. You return to the hut at dusk, shoulders bowed and spirit battered. Hunger rumbles in your belly more fiercely than the manor bell calling labor. You sit by the dying embers of the hearth and imagine the harvest that will feed your family for another year. You know you will owe the tithe on that harvest too. 1/10 of every kernel will vanish from your barn and fill the Lord's granary. You stir the last remains of the day's porridge, thin and lifeless. You press stale bread into the mush and dip in until it softens. You swallow the mash without tasting as you count the days left before the season's demands end. There are still months of labor ahead. You pass the bowl to your child, who licks every drop clean. You feel shame at the meager meal you offer, but pride in the fact that you provide at all. You step outside into the cold night and look at the moon peeking through ragged clouds. You think of the corvée duties that will call you back at dawn. You think of the taxes and tithes that strip your land of its bounty. Yet you know that, despite the endless demands of the Lord, despite the empty fields and hollow bellies, you remain tied to this soil by blood and sweat. You stand a peasant forced to serve before you can sow your own crop, but you endure because survival demands you do so. And in that endurance, you carry the fierce pride of standing your ground, even at the expense of your own fields. You stumble back to your own fields at dawn's second call, the memory of yesterday's forced labor still heavy in your bones. Today, the Lord's steward rides in on a grey stallion, ledger in hand, flanked by 2 armed men. You feel the weight of their gaze as you drop your hoe and step forward. The steward announces that it is time for the tithe. You must surrender 1/10 of your barley from last year's harvest, and the same share of this season's potatoes and turnips. You watch as your neighbor lifts a sheaf of golden stalks and lays it on a rough wooden platform. The bailiff measures out the appropriate bundle and nods in approval before handing the rest back. You follow suit. You gather the few sheaves you manage to harvest with your own hands and set them down under the steward's stern eye. The feel of dry stalks slips from your fingers like promise you cannot keep. You taste dust on your tongue as you turn your back and walk away. Behind you, the sounds of sheaves shifting and grain sacks rustling fill the morning air. A clerk jots down the weight of each tithe in a leather-bound book. You think of the 100 sheaves that used to stand in your loft. Now only 90 remain, and those will keep your family fed for a few weeks if you share equally. You wonder how you will feed them when winter arrives and the fields lie barren once more. The steward calls you forward next. He points to a pile of vegetables in front of the barn. You step up and feel the rough floor beneath your feet. A whipcord of fear tightens in your chest as the steward lays out a length of rope. He knots it around a sack of potatoes until the top strain cuts into your fingers. He juggles the sack back and forth to ensure it weighs the proper share. It wobbles on your hip like a bundle of stones. You carry the sack to the manor granary with shaking shoulders. Each step you take echoes through the courtyard and reminds you of the fields left waiting for your plough. You reach the twin doors and set the sack down beside the other parcels of produce. You watch the bailiff push the door shut on your livelihood. The heavy wood booms in your chest as if it were the heart of the Lord beating you down. As you leave the granary, the steward reminds you of tithes, in kind owed by every peasant. You bow quickly and keep your gaze low. You sense the disdain in his voice when he adds an extra half bushel of barley for taxes owed on last year's piglet. You wonder how the steward measured your family's piglet feeding in silver coin or grain. You swallow a dry lump of resentment and march back to the field edge. Your hands itch for the hoe once more, but you walk past the rows of young barley that need weeding. You choke back a curse when you recall that you owe more days of forced labor before this month ends. Your neighbor meets your eyes and shakes his head. We both owe the same fate, he mouths without words. You feel grateful for solidarity, but angry that the Lord's demands leave no room for your own fields. At midday you return home to gather eggs for another tax. The henhouse is quiet except for a few soft clucks. You bend over and slip your hand under a clutch of nesting hens. You count 5 eggs. You have 6 in your own account, but the Lord's tithe takes 1 first. You place it in a small basket and carry the rest into the kitchen. Your child cries when you offer the meager feast of eggs and mush. You kiss her forehead and promise that tonight you will offer porridge as thick as you can muster. You step outside to find the steward's clerk waiting. He holds a copper chalice as if it were a symbol of power. He explains that all peasant households owe an annual levy paid in coin or produce. You have no silver stash. You offer the last pound of salted pork from the winter reserve, and the clerk nods gravely before pocketing the meat. You rue the day you salted so little because you knew tithes would come calling. The bailiff's horn announces the afternoon corvée for road repairs. You drag your weary feet back toward the manor. You lift a plank to shore up a washout in the main road. Each hammer blows rings against your tender knuckles. Mud sprays in all directions as you drive oak nails through rotten boards. You feel the sting of each impact in your shoulder and forearm. This road will carry the Lord in his carriage, but swallow your strength once more. By evening, you hobble back to your hut. Your arms feel spent, and your back sings with protest. You look at the furrows you left untended this morning and taste failure on your tongue. You must choose between losing grain to weeds or losing strength to corvée. Neither choice leads to a harvest bountiful enough to keep hunger at bay. Inside the hut, your spouse greets you with a hollow smile that tries to hide worry lines around her eyes. You set down your tools and kneel by the hearth. The pot simmers with the last of the barley mash. You ladle 2 bowls of porridge and break the last bread loaf into torn chunks. You place them before your family in silence. Each of you eats without speaking, the weight of the day's tributes heavy in your bellies. After the meal, you pull the door closed against the cold night air. You settle on the pallet beside your child and stroke soft fingers through tangled hair. You breathe in the smoky warmth of the fire and promise yourself that tomorrow you will pry extra moments from the Lord's service to weed your own field, to feed your family, to keep your head above the tide of demands. You close your eyes and wish the sun would rise slowly. You know when it wakes it will call you back to the manor and the steward and the bailiff and their endless list of demands. You drift into a restless sleep full of visions of empty granaries and overgrown fields. You clutch these visions until dawn's bell rings once more, and hunger calls you back to labor and tribute. You rise at first light, shoulders aching from yesterday's toil, only to find the air thick with the stench of rot and mildew. In the corner of your hut, a pair of rats scuttle beneath a loose floorboard. Their fur hangs in damp clumps and their eyes gleam with hunger. You know their kind all too well. They carry fleas that spread fever and swollen glands. You scoop up a tallow lamp and watch as one rat skitters past the hearth flame. The other bolts into the darkness. You step outside and the garden lies under a silent threat. Tiny holes pock the cabbage leaves where caterpillars have chewed in the night. Aphids cluster like moving mold along the stems of your onion shoots. A single moth alights on your finger, its wings dusted with powdery scales. You brush it off and think of the locust swarms that travel in waves across distant fields. A single plague of locusts can strip a field bare in hours. You make your way to the granary where sacks of barley and oats wait for winter. The floor is littered with spilled grain and the telltale droppings of mice. You kneel and scoop the droppings into a leather pouch. You scatter them at the granary's edge to warn others of the infestation. Then you set traps made of broken pottery and a handful of barley. You smear lard on the rim to lure the rodents inside. You know that each mouse caught is one fewer carrier of disease in your home. Disease lurks in stagnant water, too. You carry water from the well, but sometimes the rope rubs against rotten wood and sprouts algae. You filter each bucket through a cloth to catch mosquito larvae wriggling at the edges. You watch them float away on the surface before you ladle water into your skin. You taste a faint bitterness, and imagine the fever that arrives after a single sip of contaminated water. Dysentery can strike in a single night and leave you weak and bent double. Beyond the hut, you see your neighbor's barn. He leans on a crutch, his leg wrapped in stained bandages. The plague of rats climbed his wall and carried infection in their bite. He survived the fever, but lost his foot to gangrene. You flinch at the sight of his wound, oozing black fluid at the edges. You hurried back to your own hut to fetch vinegar and clean cloth. You dab at the wound from a safe distance, knowing the cure is no guarantee of survival. On the path through the village, you pass the common water trough. A green film of scum stretches across its surface like a blanket. You see mosquitoes hover above. You pinch your nose and move on. You have heard that boiling water and hanging bunches of rue along the trough can ward off insects, but your energies belong to crops and ploughing before tomorrow's labor call. In the fields, you find the cabbages again. Tiny green worms coil around the veins of each leaf. You pluck the worst and crush them under your boot. You know you cannot kill them all. You whittle a wooden stake and drive it into the soil near the plants. You hang a rag soaked in urine on the stake. The scent masks the cabbage smell and drives away some of the pests. You feel a twinge of shame for resorting to such methods, but you cannot watch your seedling harvest fail. Nearby, you find a bed of ripening wheat. The stalks sway in the breeze, but beneath the ears you glimpse movement. Grain weevils skitter across the kernels. You press your hand against the wheat head and shake it sharply. Weevils spill onto the ground and crawl back toward the stubble. You gather handfuls of the infested grain and spread it thin on a tarp in the sun. You know it will kill the insects and their eggs. The cure shrinks your supply, but preserves the rest for winter milling. At midday, you retreat to the shade of the lean-to beside the barn. You fetch a cup of barley porridge and swallow it while you consider the threats you have faced. Rats, fleas, lice weevils, caterpillars, aphids, mosquitoes, they all feast on your labors and spread death in their wake. You shudder at the memory of villagers who fell during the Great Plague 2 seasons past. Entire homesteads vanished when the fever stormed through without mercy. You rise to your feet and search your pouch for juniper berries and dried lavender. You thread them on a length of twine and loop the sachet around your neck. You tuck another inside your shirt. The scents mask the stench of decay and repel some insects. You know it is only a small defense against the hordes, but it brings comfort to your senses. In the afternoon, you walk to the chicken coop to feed the hens. You scatter grains laced with crushed garlic at each corner of the pen. You have heard that garlic repels mites and insects. You watch the hens fluff their feathers and scratch at the garlic dust. Might it save their blood from lice and mites? You cannot know, but you hope. The sun dips low, and you head toward the pond. The surface is still except for clusters of frogs hunting mosquitoes. Their croaks echo across the water, and you catch a whiff of decay in the shallows. You pluck a handful of marsh plants and crush them underfoot. The scent chases away gnats and gives you a moment's peace. You gather what you can carry and slip the leaves into your satchel for tomorrow's chores. At dusk, you return to the hut. Your skin itches with little bumps from flies and fleas. You strip down to your shift and bathe in a pail of cold water. You scrub with sand and a handful of wood ash. The grit scourges fleas and lice from your body, but your skin burns with abrasions. You feel alive with pain, but free of the parasites that crawl at the edge of your awareness. You dress in a fresh tunic and use a new length of linen to wrap your hair. You hang your old clothes outside the hut to air in the moonlight. You know that fleas hide in every seam, and you cannot sleep with them. Under a damp sky, you press your worn shoes into the mud once more and wipe your hands on a scrap of cloth. Inside the hut, the fire embers glow red. You tend the flames and warm a pot of barley tea spiced with the herbs you foraged. You cradle the cup and breathe in the smoky scent. You sip cautiously. The bitterness clears your mind and soothes the itch in your throat where yesterday's smoke stung you. Your child stirs beside you, waking at the scent. You wipe your mouth and offer the cup. They sip and cough at the taste, but then nod in approval. You feel a surge of relief. Even a bitter tea warms the belly and chases anxiety from the mind. You glance around the hut and see that the last of the food stocks await tomorrow's weeding and ploughing. You count each grain and each bit of cured meat. You know that any crop lost to worms or eaten by rodents means less for your table. You taste responsibility on your tongue and the grit of barley dust. You carry your child to the straw pallet where clean linen sheets wait on a wooden frame. You tuck them in and drape a woolen blanket over their small body. You kiss their forehead and promise that tomorrow you will protect the family from infestations. You will guard the seeds and guard their health from plague if you can. You step outside into the chill night and hang the last of your old clothes on a crossbeam. You smear a handful of ash across door thresholds to deter pests. You draw a circle of salt around the doorway to keep vermin from sneaking inside. Then, you wipe your hands on your tunic and step back into the warm hut. You close the door against the cold and lean back against the stone wall. In the glow of the fire, you reflect on the day's battle against creatures you cannot see, but whose presence is undeniable. You gathered traps and poisons. You burned herbs and scoured flesh with sand. You boiled tea and hung your clothes to kill the crawlers. Each measure is a small victory in a war that never ends. You curl up on your own pallet and pull the blanket tight around you. You taste ash and barley tea lingering on your lips. You drift towards sleep, muscles sore from skirmishes with rodents and insects. Outside the hut, the rats prowl and the owls call. You know that tomorrow you will face them again at dawn. Yet in the knowledge that your measures hold them at bay, even for a moment you find a fragile peace. And in that peace you discover the strength to endure the next sunrise. You rise before dawn once again, knowing that plague can strike at any moment in the damp village air. You wrap a damp cloak around your shoulders and step outside into the chill. Ahead, smoke curls from the neighboring hut where the master smith's wife lies fevered and delirious. Word has spread that she has fever and swellings in her armpits, the telltale signs of the dreaded plague that came through last spring. You carry a bowl of violet tea steeped from petals you sold at the market, and vinegar scented with rue. You knock at the door and cry out your offering. The smith emerges, eyes hollow and grim. He takes the bowl with a trembling hand and lifts the lid, inhaling deeply. You warn him to keep the door closed and to hang posies of lavender and mint at every window. He nods and retreats within, boarding up the entrance. You cross yourself and hurry on toward the fields, the chill sinking into your bones. In the barley field, you find patches of mildew curling the edges of the green leaves. You dip a bundle of straw into a bucket of lime wash that you mixed this morning. With both hands, you brush the lime across each leaf, coating the plants in a white film that will stifle the fungus. You feel the grit of lime under your nails as you work, and you taste grit on your tongue from brushing sweat and lime splotches away. Every plant you treat is an act of defiance against decay. Beyond the barley, you see the vines of peas and beans. Tiny holes pock their leaves from flea beetles. You fetch a handful of ash from last night's hearth. You toss ash into the soil around the plants, creating a barrier that deters small insects. The breeze carries wisps of ash across the field, and you cough into your sleeve. The plants will suffer a little powder, but the pests will starve. You wipe ash from your boots and move on. At midday, you pause to catch your breath in the shade of the withered oak at the field's edge. You shake the ashes from your hair and sip your water from a goatskin flask. The air tastes of dust and sweat. You notice birds circling overhead. The blackbirds have learned to feast on the infestation of beetles. You consider building perches for owls and hawks to take residence near the fields. A natural predator is worth more than any spray. You return to the village just as the church bell tolls for midday prayers. You hurry inside, treading across the cool stone floor toward the priest. The church is filled with the scent of incense. Flickering candles illuminate the faces of the faithful. each bowed in solemn hope. You light a candle of your own at the shrine of Saint Roche, the protector against plague. You whisper a prayer for your neighbors and for your own family. You feel a tremor of fear give way to resolve. Outside the church, you see a line of villagers waiting at the common well. You approach and see that someone has dropped a coin into the water to pay a blessing fee. You raise your bucket and dip it into the spring. You filter the water through a cloth and take a careful sip. It is cool and clear. You imagine that at least this water will not spread sickness. The afternoon brings more signs of the fever. A litter of kittens writhes behind the baker's stall, weak from flea-borne infection. You scoop them into a basket and carry them to the smith who has just completed applying the violet vinegar to his wife's wound. The smith looks at the kittens with pity and agrees to let you slip them beneath a stack of straw in his forge keep. He promises to leave the door ajar so the heat will deter fleas. You hurry onto the granary to inspect the grain stores. The sacks stand in neat rows, but you hear the telltale scratching of rodents. You crack open a sack on the floor and find weevil holes in the oats. You toss the oats into a clean basket and set the sack aside for burning. You scoop fresh grain into new sacks and stack them on higher shelving to keep them dry. You hang a bundle of crushed garlic from the beam above the sacks. The scent will repel mice and rats and keep your family fed longer. As the sun sinks low, you visit the herb garden behind the manor house. The bailiff stands among rows of rue and wormwood, barking orders to the steward. He sees you and waves you over. He points at a patch of feverfew and instructs you to harvest it for tinctures. You kneel and clip a handful of leaves with your small shears. You bundle the herbs and tie them with linen strips. You promise to return tomorrow to gather more. You rest a moment beneath the fading light and watch as workers haul away plague victims to the communal pit. Their bodies lie on carts covered in cloth. Rats swarm over the carts and slip between the beams. You feel a surge of dread. You wrap your bundle of herbs against your chest as if they could shield you. You step aside and let the cart pass, struck by the sorrow of the moment. Back in the village, you glimpse the baker's wife at her oven. She sprinkles a handful of crushed mint over rising loaves. The scent is sharp and fresh in the warm air. You nod in approval. She hands you a small loaf cooled this morning. You take it, pressing it to your chest. The crust feels like a treasure you cannot afford to waste. You promise to share it with your family tonight. Evening arrives with the clang of the manor gate. You hurry to fill the hearth with fresh kindling. You scoop embers from last night's fire and blow gently until the coals glow. You hang your herbs above the flames, letting their scent fill the hut. You fill a pot with water and drop in handfuls of feverfew leaves and lavender. The brew hisses and steams as you stir it with a spoon carved from oak. You pour the herbal tea into cups. You offer it to your spouse and child. They sip slowly, their faces relaxing as the warmth soothes aching limbs and rattled nerves. The tea tastes faintly, bitter, and floral. You feel it working through your body, settling your stomach and calming the itch of insect bites. As night falls, you hang the last of your clothes on a line by the hearth embers. You sweep the floor to clear fallen leaves and ash. You light a final candle and place it on the table by your child's bed. You tuck your child in beneath fresh linen and kiss their forehead. You breathe in the herbal scent of mint and wormwood drifting through the hut. You sit by the fire and reflect on the day's work. You treated mildew and weeds and rodents. You brewed vinegars and traps and teas. You prayed for deliverance and held your child close against the night's fear. Yet you know tomorrow you will face plague rats and insects once again. The threats will never end, but you have fought back today with your own hands and your own wits. You have called on nature's own remedies and on traditions passed through generations. You have tended each plant and each pot with care, and in that care you find a slender thread of hope. You lay your head on the straw pallet, the candle guttering beside you. You taste ashes and tea and barley dust on your lips. Outside, the rain drums on the roof and the rats skitter behind the walls. But here, In the glow of the hearth you rest, knowing you have done all you can to hold disease and pests at bay for one more night. You close your eyes and drift towards sleep, ready to rise again at first light and face the threats anew. You wake before dawn on St. Martin's Day to the scent of roasting goose and spiced wine drifting through the village. Smoke curls from every hearth chimney and shines gold in the sunrise. For once the baker's cart rattles over the frozen mud, its wheels piled high with fresh white loaves as soft as clouds. Children race through the streets brandishing bits of sugar candy they dared not hope for. You pinch the hem of your tunic to stop yourself from running toward the feast. You step into the manor courtyard and see barrels of ale lined in neat rows. Each barrel bears the Lord's crest and promises frothy mugs that slosh sweet and warming against your lips. You hear the minstrels tuning lutes in the hall above the kitchen, where women stir kettles of honeyed pottage and cluck like hens bedecked in festive scarves. The air brims with laughter and the drumbeat of celebration that feels like spring breaking across your skin. At the long trestle table, you find your place between the miller and the scribe. You bow your head as the steward carves the first bird, its breast white beneath a crust of salt and herbs. You lift a wooden trencher and dip its edge into a pool of golden drippings. You follow with a bite of goose, so rich the fat coats your tongue like velvet. Your belly swells in gratitude. For this single day you taste wealth you cannot afford any other time of year. The children squeal as sugar cones spill pink and white crystals into their hands. You steal a kiss of syrup from the edge of your trencher and feel a rare spark of luxury ignite your chest. You pass the cone to your apprentice and watch their eyes widen with wonder at the sweetness. You recall months of barley gruel and stale cheese. You recall the lash of winter wind through your homespun tunic and the hollow ache of hunger between dawn and dusk. Today all that is forgotten. You rise to join the dance around the maypole erected in front of the hall. Neck and shoulder stiff from ploughing, you move with surprising grace as you weave colored strips around the tall pole. The fiddler's bow skids across strings and the village elder claps in time. Your feet shuffle in the mud and straw tossed for traction. For this blessed hour you stand free of your daily burdens. The world shrinks to the beat of your heart and the warmth of your breath. By midday the feast reaches its crescendo. The steward brings out baked apples stuffed with almonds and honey. You take one, its pastry crisp and heady with spice. You bite through the shell and feel the fruit's warmth flood your mouth. You close your eyes against the sunlight, trading the memory of bitter porridge and boiled turnips for this single moment of sweetness. A goblet of spiced wine follows and you swallow it deep, letting the carnival swirl in your veins. Then the bells toll for vespers and you step into the chapel where flickering candles illuminate stone walls, blackened by soot and time. The priest intones prayers for plenty and deliverance from hunger. You kneel and press rough hands together. You feel the rhythm of your pulse slowing as you lend your hope to the words. The flicker of candlelight shifts with each breath. You taste smoke and faith mingled on the air. After vespers, you return to the courtyard for the final rites of celebration. The stew pot is emptied and the barrels drained. You linger by the fire where embers glow red. You speak with your neighbor about the year ahead. You laugh and promise that next St. Martin's Day you will carve your own goose. You almost believe it. Then the sun sinks low and the flame in your heart dims. You remember that feast days are rare as hen's teeth. Tomorrow you will rise to ice crusted on the doorway. You will return to the field where snow melts into sucking mud. You will lift your hoe and plough beam and kneel in furrows that must wait for the thaw. You will taste again the cold porridge and the stale bread and wonder how you will make it through another season. On the morrow, the baker's cart returns to its lonely route, delivering rock-hard loaves salted for preservation. The barrels of ale drained at the feast lie empty under drizzly skies. The lords demand their share of grain to refill the manor stables, and your loft stands nearly bare. You head to the field at dawn with a leather satchel and your labourer's tools. You kneel in frozen soil to clear weeds grown hungry under the snowmelt. You tug at the roots with numb fingers and feel the ache in your back deepen as you lean into the earth. You taste the chill on your tongue as your breath clouds before you. You think of pigeons at the dovecote, now gone because the manor decided the birds were too costly to feed all winter. You remember the taste of fresh meat on feast day and compare it to the skimpy rations of salted fish that sting your throat now. The contrast slams into your senses like a hammer blow. You return home at midday to a bowl of watered-down porridge. The pot holds little more than barley and thin broth. You stare into its grey surface and wonder if the meagre fare will keep your bones from seizing in the frost. You tear off a hunk of crusty bread and crumble it into the bowl. You swallow without tasting and force yourself to step outside again. For 40 days thereafter, the church decrees fasting. No meat from Monday through Saturday. Fish only on Wednesday and Friday. You rise on Ash Wednesday and feel the hunger sharpen your senses. The scribe at the manor holds out a single fish head as your portion. You swallow it in one gulp. The bones scrape in your throat. You hide the taste of vinegar and salt from the neighbors who watch with pity. Throughout Lent, you see others carve away their rations to meet the fasting rules. You watch the baker bake whole grain loaves because refined flour is forbidden. You bite on a loaf twice your weight and chew its dense crumb until your jaw aches. You taste the bitter crust as penance for your sins. Each bite reminds you that even scant forgiveness demands sacrifice. After the fast comes rogation days, when you must carry heavy crosses through the fields to bless them against storms and pestilence. You plod behind the priest, carrying a cross weighed down with bells. Each chime rings through your bones. You feel the ghost of feast day joy vanish in the howling wind. And then the single season you live for arrives. The harvest. You stand in fields of golden barley beneath a sun that finally warms your blood. You bind sheaves by hand until your grip bleeds. You tie stooks of grain and stack them for threshing. For a week, you taste the sweat of labor and the promise of plenty. Grain rains into sacks beneath the flails and the smell of chaff drifts in the air. Yet if storms arrive early or rains refuse to cease at harvest time, the yield shrivels to dust. You watch your fellow peasants curse the heavens as their stooks sag under mold. You taste fear as you imagine lean months ahead. You remember how a single bad harvest 2 seasons past cost entire villages their seed for next spring. You felt famine claw at your door then, and you know the craving for bread never truly leaves you. By Michaelmas the feast returns once more. You break the fast again with goose and wine and sugar, sweet pastries made from the paltry almond supply. You taste a sliver of almond marzipan and feel the world soften beneath your tongue. It is a miracle that something so small can spark joy in a hardened heart. Then again, you return to the fields to feed beasts and repair fences. The orchard yields only a few apples under the frozen branches. The coop offers 3 eggs. You brood over the meager gifts of a year balanced between feast and famine. In those moments, as you scrape the last turnip from the ground, you remember every feast you celebrated and every fast you endured. You taste each in your bones. You know that a single feast day can carry you through months of hunger and cold. You know that a single bad harvest can end a household. You move forward between those 2 extremes, celebration and starvation, knowing that your survival depends on the fleeting miracle of plenty and the grim endurance of hunger. You wake before dawn to the distant clash of steel on wood and the howl of hunting horns. From your hut, you see torches bobbing along the ridge, where raiders pour through the border forests. Their banners are ragged and blackened by fire. You grab your cloak and slip outside to find smoke rising over your neighbor's barn. The threshing floor smolders, shattered by flaming arrows, lofted by riders you dared not imagine. You dash to the fields and catch the silhouette of mounted men spurring through the furrows. They brandish curved swords and laugh as they slash your crop stakes. You flinch as one raider sweeps up a stack of sheaves, your sheaves, and tosses them into his saddlebag. Each stolen stack feels like a broken promise of next season's bread. You stand frozen until the torches vanish into the night, taking your harvest with them. Morning brings worse tidings. A detachment of the Lord's knights and their men-at-arms thunder into the village square. Their cuirasses gleam in the sun, but instead of protection, they carry a new terror. The seneschal proclaims that every able-bodied peasant must provide supplies and carry arms for the king's war effort. You are marched past the smithy, where your single iron pike is handed over and deemed woefully inadequate. You receive in exchange a crude spear of ash wood and a pair of leather reins to haul the baggage train. You join the conscript column at the edge of the woods. The officer yells at you to shoulder your pack and fall into line. You lift the canvas sack heavy with a loaf of black bread, a water skin, and 2 salted herring. You curse the meagerness of your kit as you shoulder it and step onto the muddy road. Behind you, the manor horses clip-clop toward the distant border camp, dragging carts full of grain, livestock, and any scrap of wealth left in the village. The forced march begins at a brisk pace. Your boots sink into churned mud and shingle, sending pain up your calves with every step. You breathe the dust of the road and the smell of manure from the wagons in front. A boy who joined at the muster collapses beside you, leg trembling under the weight. The officer kicks him to his feet. You help the boy stagger back into line, praying you will both make it to the camp alive. By noon, you trudge past burned cottages and shuttered huts. Each burned door and broken window reminds you of raiders who slipped past these same roads. You hear that the war has drawn mercenaries from across the sea, men who answer only to gold and kill at a whim. You shiver despite the sun's heat. You swallow dust-caked air and taste grit on your tongue. Hunger tugs at your stomach as you break the crusty loaf for half a bite before tossing the rest to a stray dog. As the sun sets, you reach the army's encampment. Tents flap in a meadow churned to mire. Bonfires burn on the far edge where the field artillery and catapults stand. You unshoulder your pack, shoulders screaming in protest, and kneel to receive a tin cup of watery stew. The cook ladles thin broth of turnips and small beans. You thank him in a whisper and drink until the chill of the evening starts to ease. Night brings little rest. You lie on damp grass beside a sentry tower, boots still on, spear within reach. You listen to the groans of the wounded and the wails of the sick. During last spring's plague, many fell in camp, and a new fever has begun to spread again. You taste fear on the air as you wonder if tomorrow's march will find you among the living. At dawn, the officer's horn calls you back to line. You rise with stiff joints and shoulders bound in ache. You shoulder your spear again and slip into formation behind the army's standard. The banner of the realm flutters above you, a reminder that your life now belongs to a war you did not choose. You step forward onto the road once more, each footfall a beat in the march of thousands. You march for days toward the border fortress. Forage parties sent ahead return empty-handed and beaten. You see ragged detachments scavenging for roots and leaves to stave off starvation. You taste bitterness in your mouth when your ration of hard biscuit runs out and you are forced to chew a piece of leather from your pack for flavor. Each swallow tears at your throat. When at last you glimpse the fortress walls, you feel a surge of terror and relief. The fortress bristles with archers and sell swords. Gates clang open to admit wagons of grain for the garrison. You are ordered inside and spat upon by defenders who blame you for the raids. You bow your head and scurry to unload your pack. Inside the keep, you spend a night in a damp stone barracks. You share the moldy straw pallet with 3 other peasants, each coughing from camp fever. You huddle together beneath a thin blanket and count your blessings that you still breathe. Outside in the courtyard, you see the tip of the foe's banner shimmering in the dawn haze. The war looms closer than ever. By the 3rd day, you are ordered to march out with the vanguard. You shoulder your spear and join the column filing through the gate. You wonder if you will return at all. You swallow your fear, grip the shaft tight, and step into uncertainty. Each footstep echoes with the terror of raiders you faced on home roads and the fate of those who fell to plague and kill. Still, you march on, driven by orders above your station. Behind you lie fields you will never tend again, barns you will never refill, children you may never see. Ahead lies nothing but slogging toward a battle you cannot fathom. And yet, you march into the haze, a single peasant among thousands, each bound to the terror of raiders, war and forced marches beyond the borders of home. You tread the muddy path toward the manor's gallows, with every footstep heavy in your heart. The scaffold looms against a grey sky like a jagged tooth ready to bite. Beneath the hanging beam stands a row of charred stakes where bodies once dangled by the neck until their limbs went rigid. A crowd gathers beyond the fencing, faces pale in torchlight, waiting for justice to be served in a display of power and terror. At the center of the yard, the bailiff steps forward, fat leather gloves creaking at his sides. He raises a hand and cries out the crime of the condemned man whose face is hidden beneath a hood. The offense matters little to you. It might have been stealing a loaf of bread through hunger or disputing the Lord's claim on your crop. The verdict is always the same. Confessions forced through the rack, tongues torn by hot irons, and eyes blinding by red-hot pokers all vanish from record once the sentence is proclaimed. You hold your breath as the hood is removed. The condemned is a fellow peasant, thin and shaking with fever. His eyes search the crowd and lock on yours for a moment. You feel shame for surviving when he stands before you, legs chained, wrists scraped and bleeding, awaiting the noose. He was your neighbor and your friend through frost and famine. You swallow the lump in your throat and force your gaze to fall to the ground. The executioner steps forward with a rope looped in his rough hand. He cinches the knot in one smooth motion and drapes it over the crossbeam. You hear the buckle of leather straps as the man is bound and led to the platform's edge. A hush falls on the crowd. The only sound is the drip of rain from the scaffold beams and the faint sobs of the condemned's cousin at the front of the crowd. When the trapdoor swings open, the man's feet vanish into darkness. His arms clench the rope until the bones in his wrists crack. You flinch at the snap. He hangs suspended for a moment as if caught between this world and the next. His body twitches twice and then stills. A knot of sorrow forms in your chest and tightens until you cannot breathe. After a pause, the bailiff orders the body left to sway and warn any who dare defy the Lord's law. You step back from the platform and feel eyes burning into your shoulders. The cold wind carries the stench of death across the yard. You imagine the rope's fibers cutting deeper into flesh with each gust, reminding the living how close they stand to the end. You leave the crowd to disperse after the Baron's men drag the body to the charnel pit. You feel the weight of every step away from the gallows, as if each foot carries a stone. You pass the stocks by the church door, where a youth whimpers with his head and hands locked in place. He stole eggs again for his starving family. The crowd spit and jeer as he begs for release. He will remain there until his wage matches the eggs, or until the Lord grows bored of his suffering. You hurry past the whipping post, where a woman bends beneath the carved oak beam and bares her back for lashes. She confessed to collecting firewood from sacred forest land. Each stroke of the whip leaves red stripes that glisten with fresh blood. The Lord demands strict order in his domain. No one may take what is forbidden. No one may question his judgment. As you cross the bridge back to your home, you notice the iron ring driven into the stone wall. It marks the spot where traitors were branded with the Lord's seal. The brand looks like a burning sun pressed into flesh. You imagine how its heat seared skin and flesh until the brand held fast. You pass without touching the ring, convinced your hands must stay clean if you hope to avoid the Lord's wrath. That night you sit by the hearth, hands trembling as you stir the scant porridge. The child sleeps in the corner, too young to understand justice by hanging tree. You fill 2 bowls and push one toward your spouse. She nods in thanks, but her eyes tell a tale of dread. You both know that an unlucky word, a stolen loaf, or a stray witness could be enough to earn a place beneath the gallows or in the stocks come dawn. The next morning you rise to new orders. The bailiff summons every man able to work a saw and carry timber. The manor's grain silo needs repair after a storm's wind tore away the thatch. You shoulder your axe and join the forced labor line, leaving your own plot to wilt without care. You watch the gallows crossbeam from the corner of your eye as you hew beams. You know your body could easily take a punishing blow should you falter. The master mason stands by with whipcord in hand to remind you that mistakes cost more than sweat. By midday you work faster, fear driving every swing. You measure and cut wood at a pace that leaves your back screaming. You lean against the fresh beam and wipe your brow. You wonder if your ancestors ever faced such relentless justice. They may have carved ruins for other lords, but never with stocks and gallows always looming. That evening you return home, shoulders raw from hauling beams. You find a small gift on your doorstep, a single egg wrapped in seaweed and sea salt. It lies next to a rough note scratched on bark. The stranger's gift holds a message of defiance. He thanks you for your kindness in the field and encourages you to endure. You cradle the egg and press it to your heart. You vow that you will survive this Lord's justice. You will live to see a day when the trees rise against the gallows and the stocks lie broken in forgotten dust. In the dim light, you light a candle and place the egg in a bowl. You whisper a prayer that tomorrow's justice will be tempered by mercy. You cover the egg and slip beneath your blanket. You taste fear and hope mingled on your tongue. Outside the hut, the wind rattles at the door. The hanging tree awaits another visitor at dawn. You close your eyes and steel your heart for the day ahead, certain that justice by Lord and hanging tree will not be the end of your story. Winter starvation and frozen bones, you wake before dawn to the silence of a world locked in ice. The door to your hut creaks as you push it open and feel the frozen breath of morning. Frost coats the field like a layer of bone. Every blade of grass is stiff and white. Your boots crack against the frozen ground and send splinters of ice skittering away. You shiver under a cloak heavy with cold. Your fingers ache as you lift a chipped bowl to fill at the well. The rope is frozen to the pulley and frees only with a harsh yank that strains your shoulder. The bucket returns almost solid, crystals clinging to its rim. You pour water into your pot and watch steam rise like ghosts before your eyes. Even the water tastes of ice. At the hearth, you coax embers back to life. The fire sputters before burning bright enough to warm your back. You drop a handful of wood inside and let the smoke curl toward the ceiling. You hang a cauldron of thin porridge over the flames. Each grain of barley is precious this time of year. When your loaf of bread has finally hardened into stone, you will break it with your knife and soak it in this gruel until it softens. Outside the hut, the wind howls across the frozen waste. You step into the courtyard to gather firewood. Frost-killed branches crack beneath your boots and splinter under your axe. You carry a small bundle back inside and stack it beside the hearth. You close the door against the wind and brace your back against the warm stone. The cold seems to recede only a little for each log you burn. You taste hunger keen as steel in your stomach. Food prices have soared since last season's frost burned the early wheat and barley. The baker charges twice the usual coin for a loaf. Your coin pouch lies empty after tithes and corvée. You dare not risk a journey to the market in this cold. Bandits and wolves prowl the frozen roads looking for any soul who dares travel without shelter. You stir the porridge and sprinkle in a few dried turnip cubes salvaged from last autumn's root cellar. The flavor is bitter and faintly sweet. You ladle a small portion into your bowl. You chew slowly, stretching each morsel as long as you can. Your child sits beside you on a wooden stool, shivering in wool that smells of damp and age. You break off a small piece of bread and press it into their hand. They nibble with cold tears in their eyes. Outside the window, the fields lie dead beneath a frozen sky. No seed will stir until the thaw. Snow lingers in drifts because it never fully melts. You recall summer's green promise and wonder if you will ever see it again. Winter stretches before you, like an endless trial of cold and hunger. Night falls fast. Torches flicker weakly along the walls of neighboring huts. You close the shutters and return to the hearth. Flames dance against the dark timbers and cast shadows that twist on the walls. You huddle under your cloak and press your aching limbs against the fading heat. You pray for spring rain and thawing sun. You pray for relief from hunger that gnaws at your bones as fiercely as frost. You drift toward sleep in the cramped hut, the last ember glowing at your feet. You taste cold and flame mixed on your tongue. Outside, the world remains locked in ice. Your spirit shivers, but endures. When dawn comes, you will rouse yourself and tend the hearth again, because frozen bones may ache, but they will not break. You slip through a hidden doorway beneath the granary and find yourself in a dusty cellar lit by a single lantern. The air is thick with the scent of mold and fear. Around you, a handful of villagers huddle close, voices low and urgent. Each face is drawn and shadowed by candlelight. You close the hatch behind you and let the bolt slide home. A farmer clears his throat and spreads a crude map on the table. He points at the manor walls, the guard towers, and the main gate. His voice trembles as he outlines a plan to seize the armory and free the peasants bound for conscription. You press a hand to your chest as your heart races. A spark of hope glows in the dim cellar. A woman leans forward and whispers that last year 4 men tried to burn the bailiff's ledger of taxes. They were caught, tortured until they named every accomplice, and then strung up from the hanging tree. You taste bile at the memory, but you grip the lantern stand and grit your teeth. This new plot will be different, because it relies on stealth rather than fire. You promise silence and loyalty. Each whispered vow resonates, like a promise, against the cold stone walls. You memorize the signal to light lanterns in barn lofts at midnight, the password to exchange at the gate, and the narrow path through the woods that leads to the rear armory door. You know that a single misstep could doom you all. Outside the cellar, the wind rattles shuttered windows. You imagine the manor guard patrolling above, unaware of the danger stirring just beneath their feet. You picture yourself creeping through the stables, unlatching the door to the armory, and passing swords and pikes hand to hand. You see the moment when peasants rise from their hammers and plows to stand together against tyranny, but you also remember how the last uprising ended. You recall the screams that echoed through the village when the knights returned with ropes and whips. You remember hiding under your bed as they dragged men screaming into the snow. You remember the sight of scaffold planks stained with blood. Your stomach twists at the memory of broken bodies lying silent in the courtyard. The farmer closes the map and looks each of you in the eye. He reminds you that courage alone cannot win the day. You need supplies from the blacksmith and a distraction at the forge where sparks fly and flames roar. You need the shepherd boy to release the flock into the manor fields at dawn so the guards chase sheep instead of rebels. You need the midwife's herbs to distract the steward's wife and keep her from summoning soldiers. A hush falls over the group as each member contemplates the risk. You feel the weight of that moment settle on your shoulders. You squeeze the lantern stand and vow that you will do your part. You will light the barn lanterns. You will pass the password at the gate. You will stand with your neighbors when the call comes. Then, a sudden knock on the trapdoor freezes you all. The lantern flickers as footsteps echo overhead. You and the others press back against the wall. The hatch rattles. Your breath hitches. You grasp the farmer's sleeve and see fear and resolve shine in his eyes. A moment later, the knock vanishes. Silence returns. The lantern's glow seems brighter now. You realize that the plan must move forward tonight, or vanish forever. The glimmer of revolt pulses in your veins like a heartbeat. You whisper a final vow and slip away into the shadows, carrying hope and terror together in your chest. You wake before dawn once more, every muscle screaming protest from the endless labor you have endured. Your shoulders feel fused to your back. and each movement sends jolts of pain through your arms. You sit up on the straw pallet and flex your fingers until they tingle with blistered flesh. Your throat cracks with a parched rasp as you swallow against the bitter taste of yesterday's porridge. You swing your legs over the edge of the pallet, and your feet hit the cold floor. You hobble to the hearth and coax embers back to life beneath a small pot of barley water. The steam rises in pale clouds and curls around your face. You cup your hands to the warmth and try to ease the chill that never fully leaves your bones. You taste grit and smoke on your tongue as you sip the thin broth. Outside your hut, the dawn sky glows pale and unforgiving. You pull on stiff breeches and a tunic stiff with dried mud and sweat. Your cloak clings damp and heavy against your shoulders. You slip on wooden clogs that pinch your toes, but at least protect you from the freezing ground. Every step is a test of will as you trudge toward the fields that await your toil. You arrive at the plough stand where the oxen wait, their breath steaming in the early light. You shoulder the beam of the plough and lean into it until the share clicks into the furrow. Your back bends with the weight, and your arms shake under the strain. You urge the oxen forward with your voice, a sharp hiss that carries more fear than strength. The plough tears into the frozen earth with a crack that echoes in your bones. Each step you take drags through ice-hardened soil and leaves your legs trembling. Your hands grip the beam so tightly that your knuckles shine white. You taste iron on the tip of your tongue, the flavor of sweat and fear. Hunger gnaws at your stomach, a living thing that will not be silenced until your next thin meal. By midday, you reach the weeding beds where weeds have sprouted in the few hours since last sunup. You drop to your knees and yank at roots with raw hands. Your fingers slip on the cold soil and tear fresh wounds that burn like fire. You bite back a cry and pull harder until the roots snap free. You fling the weeds onto the compost heap and rise, your legs stiff from kneeling. The sun climbs high enough to burn through your cloak, but brings little warmth. Your clothes cling to your back and belly with sweat and mud. You wipe your brow on your sleeve and taste salt and clay on the cloth. You take the last of your rations from your pucha crust of stale bread soaked in the morning porridge. You nibble a bite and swallow it in a single gulp. The bread is cold and bland, but fills the hollows in your belly for a few precious moments. You trudge to the barn for a short break and find your neighbor huddled beside the livestock. Their eyes are sunken and haunted from the plague that stalked the village last season. They rub a piece of dried turnip between their teeth and pass you half. You take it in grateful silence, knowing that sharing what little you have is the truest sign of community in this harsh world. Back in the yard, you are called to corvée duties on the manor road. You heft a shovel onto your shoulder and join a line of laborers. Each must dig out mud ruts and refill them with gravel hauled by cart. You swing your shovel with every ounce of strength you can muster. The gravel crashes into the ruts and compacts under your boot. Your heart pounds with each blow through work that serves the Lord far more than it serves your own survival. When the horn at the manor gate signals the end of duty, you stagger back to the village. Your sides ache with every breath, and your legs tremble under the weight of unmet fatigue. You limp past burned granaries and empty fields, each a reminder of past raids and future uncertainty. You taste ash and smoke on the breeze, the scent of loss that clings to everything. In the evening, the village gathers for the weekly market. You carry your last few eggs to trade for salt and onions. You stand at the stall, glancing at the price of each trade. You swallow your pride and leave your neighbor to barter for you, splitting the salt and onions between your households. You walk away with half a spoonful of salt and a single onion over your shoulder. You know it must last until the next sunrise. At home, you light a small fire beneath your cauldron and chop the onion into slivers. You toss it into the water and let it simmer until the broth turns sweet and fragrant. You break the eggs into the pot and watch them poach in the rising steam. You ladle a bowl of the onion and egg soup and carry it to the table. The first spoonful burns your throat, but the warmth spreads through your chest and calms the hollow ache. You sit beside the hearth with your family and pass the bowl from hand to hand. Each swallow tastes of survival and solidarity. You press your hands to the bowl's rim and draw strength from the shared meal. You remember the days of abundance and the days of famine. You think of the 4 seasons you have endured and the countless rises before dawn to stare down the cold and the hunger. By candlelight you reflect on the trials of a medieval peasant. Cramping muscles sewn with pain from dawn till dusk, raw throats that rasp on meager rations, frozen bones that ache from winter's bite, the threat of lords' demands and the lash of serfdom. Raiders on the road and forced marches to war, plague in the barn and famine in the fields. Yet, despite every horror, you still breathe and still carry on. You rise from the table and clear the bowl. You wipe stray drips from the rim and hang it beside the fire to dry. You patch your cloak where it ripped on a thorn. You oil your clogs with leftover lard. You set aside your tools for tomorrow's labors, because you will rise again and face the same world. You shut the door against the night's chill and brace your back against the warm stone. You lie down on your straw pallet and tuck the blanket around your shoulders. Your family settles beside you in the flickering glow. You take a deep breath and taste sweat and smoke mingled with the faint sweetness of onion and egg. You close your eyes and feel every ache and every victory pulse beneath your skin. In that moment, you know this life was never meant to be easy. Each sunrise brings new trials, and each sunset offers scant rest. You know that any stranger's story of comfort and plenty would seem like fantasy to you. You know that if a single day can twist your body and test your spirit, you would not last more than a sunrise in this brutal existence. And yet you did last. You faced the world's cruelty and bore it with bowed head and stubborn heart. You tilled the earth and fed your family. You weathered plague and famine. You endured the lash of unjust justice and the clamor of war drums. You wore calluses like medals and scars like badges of honor. You drift into a restless sleep, bones still humming with sweat and pain. You dream of furrows turning green with spring and fields alive with promise. You dream of times when hunger will be a memory and warmth will be more than a hearth's gift. You dream of a future where your children will taste bread without fear and warmth without cost. But until that dawn arrives, you remain here, a peasant whose body bends to the soil and whose spirit bends to survive. You would not last a day in any other time or place, but you have lasted this long, and in that alone you have earned the fierce pride of every sunrise you have broken in this harsh world.